Well, in 1965, the United States was in the midst of a pretty painful transformation as it was going through the civil rights movement, trying to acquire equal rights for all Americans, most notably African Americans. And it could be argued that the institution that was at the center and the hub of the civil rights movement was the church. And I happen to be at a pretty prominent one today. This is the Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma, Alabama. So Selma, if you don't know, was the launch pad of a pretty famous march that went all the way to Montgomery, Alabama in 1965. And today we are going to be following that path. So I'm learning, don't know exactly what we're going to find along the way, but pretty excited. And right here's where we're going to start. So before I get started on this is just going to be a word that goes out to everyone. Let's all agree to start taking better care of our historic sites and discourage some of this hooliganism. I can read a little bit here, but as you can see, pretty banged up. So hey, let's be taking care of our history and be a better person. I've heard Selma before referred to as ground zero for the civil rights movement. In the early 1960s, in spite of the fact that the 15th Amendment had granted African Americans the right to vote, or granted anybody the right to vote regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, the fact remained that very few African Americans were voting. As a matter of fact, in this county, I think only 1% to 2% of African Americans were registered to vote. And that was because, well, there were all kinds of Jim Crow laws that were instituted to get around the 15th Amendment. So you'd have poll taxes and literacy tests and all kinds of crazy requirements that were designed to keep African Americans from voting. Well, in February of 1965, a group of African Americans were demonstrating, and a gentleman by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson ended up getting assaulted and was shot and killed. So, in response to that, a group here decided that they were going to stage a march from Selma to the Capitol in Montgomery, Alabama. And on March 7th, which is now referred to as Bloody Sunday, that march was put to a quick halt right here at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So on March 7th, a group led by John Williams, who's now a congressman, and Hosea Williams, marched down this street along with another group of protesters on their way to Montgomery. And right here at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met by a group of police officers who said that they were marching illegally. Whenever they were told to stand down, the protesters asked to have a moment to pray, and then all of a sudden these police officers just moved in on them with whips, clubs, tear gas, and just really brutalized this group. And a few weeks later, after it got nationwide attention. Permission was granted by a judge for a second group to come back here and do a march to Montgomery, and that was led by Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy. So I don't know if you can come to Selma, Alabama and be at the Edmund Pettus Bridge and not actually walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in the footsteps of Martin Luther King and the other members of the civil rights movement that participated in this march. Now, while I'm doing this, kind of an interesting story about this bridge. So it's called the Edmund Pettus Bridge, so obviously it's named after somebody named Edmund Pettus. Edmund Pettus was actually a brigadier general in the Confederate Army during the Civil War, and afterwards rose to become the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in the state of Alabama. So it's kind of ironic that this bridge is named after a guy who was obviously a vehement racist. And it's also the bridge where one of the most historic acts of the civil rights movement took place. Now, some have suggested that perhaps the name of this bridge needs to be changed so that it's not named after somebody that was the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. John Lewis, who was instrumental in this historic act, said, leave it how it is. Said, changing the name of a bridge doesn't change history. I think it's good that we remember both the good and the bad from history. So here, on a bridge named after really an evil man, we have one of the most amazing things in American history that took place. And kind of reminds us that, hey, people are people. They are capable of evil acts, but they're also capable of some pretty great things too. So we just walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. We're going to continue on here. All right, well, this is the Civil Rights Memorial Park on the south side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I don't know what's here, so we're going to kind of take a look around and see what they've got. It looks here like we have a few monuments to the people who were instrumental in the activities here at Selma. Among them, Reverend Hosea Williams and John Lewis, both of whom were here on Bloody Sunday. So I was just walking around here in Memorial Park in Selma, and I made a new friend.
Hey, how you guys doing?
This is Columbus.
Yes.
And your uncle?
Yes, sir, my uncle.
His uncle was here on Bloody Sunday, so I asked if he'd be willing to tell me a little bit about what he just told me on camera, and
Yes.
he's a pretty good guy, so he's going to tell us a little bit about his uncle.
Thanks a lot, JD, for coming here to Memorial Park. Just want to welcome you to Selma. Memorial Park was established in 2001. It was established to commemorate people that was actually participating in Bloody Sunday, and also the people, if you can show the people over here, this mural over here, where people actually lost their life for the right to vote. And so I come out here every day to take care of the park. My uncle was actually part of the movement on Bloody Sunday, but before he actually served in Korea. And after serving in Korea, he came back here to America, and he was actually expecting a hero's welcome, but sadly he actually found himself having to go to the back of the bus. Not only that, but also he could actually go into the front of the restaurant. He would have to go into the back, but more importantly, he couldn't vote. So in 1963, when he heard about the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, and when the 4 little girls was killed, hurt my uncle greatly, angered him, and he said, you know, it's time for me to get involved into this nonviolent movement. And of course, he joined the movement, and he was on a lot of different marches. But the most infamous one was Bloody Sunday, which is part of why JD's here. And of course, on that infamous day, my uncle was actually hit in the eye and lost sight of his left eye. But he was just a humble man, never carried the weight. He often said, I forgive them. He said, we're 99.99% genetically the same. And not only that, my uncle just had a heart of just a love. He started a 20-acre farm where he raised corn, greens, okra, tomato, peas. He fed white people, black people, anybody that need to be fed. Money never changed hand. He said God wants us to take care of our fellow man. You know, he said most people love people that look like them and love their family. He said by God, some of the worst people in the world love people that look like them and love their family, but God wants us to love everyone. And if we don't truly love everyone, when he comes back, he knows our hearts, and there's no place in heaven for us. So he was just a blessing. He was a man that actually lived Christian life. It's such thing as having a label as a Christian, but actually walking the life. And he did that. Never met a stranger, but he challenged me. He said, Columbus, it's not enough to go around telling people that I'm your uncle. He said, anybody can do that. But if you truly respect my legacy and the history, there's a park over here. Even though it's owned by the museum, but grass is growing, papers everywhere. He said, I want you to take care of it. He said, that's your skin in the game. Will you do it? And of course, I've been doing it ever since, which is why I actually ended up meeting JD. So I just want to thank him for coming, and just thank you all for listening, and thanks for coming to Selma, JD, again.
Hey man, thanks
yes, sir.
Thanks for the work you're doing.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for keeping history alive.
No, it's awesome, man.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Yes, sir.
Hey, it's good meeting you.
Nice to meet you as well.
All right. Well, that was pretty cool. I always enjoy meeting new people, and that was an interesting guy, and I appreciate kind of the work that he's doing to keep the place clean and keep the story of Selma alive. But now we are on the road to Montgomery, and we are following the exact path that the marchers that were heading to the state capitol were following. So not exactly sure what to expect on this. We're going to be looking out for road markers and historic sites, and whatever we see, we'll stop and take a look, see what we can learn. All right, well, I'm about halfway along the Selma to Montgomery National Historic Trail, and I'm at the site of a tent city that was formed in December of 1965. So the story is, after the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, there were, of course, many African Americans that went to finally get registered to vote, and as a result, a lot of them who were tenant farmers ended up getting kicked out of their home and were forced to come to this spot right here, where they formed a tent city and lived here for about 2.5 years. As you can see, it's right along the highway. And one of these little information boards said that they would have drive-by shootings from some of the KKK and segregationists down here like 3 to 4 times a week. Pretty amazing what these people went through and endured. But you can come here and see it for yourself. Very interesting. The march from Selma to Montgomery is actually over 50 miles long, so obviously the marchers couldn't do the whole thing in a day. So they had to set up some campsites along the way. Now, I missed the first 2, and happened to get lucky on the third one, though. This is the Robert Gardner farm, where the marchers stopped on March 23rd, 1965. And man, it's really something else. Not only did they have to contend with, just the physical challenges of walking this far, but they were also being jeered all along the way. They had the protection of the National Guard, but still had to endure a lot of verbal abuse. But this is where they camped out on night 3. All right, well, this is it. We are at the final destination of the march from Selma to Montgomery, right here at the Alabama State Capitol. And like a lot of other places that I seem to go, I ended up here by myself, which is kind of cool. But it's kind of neat. Right here along this street behind me is where Jefferson Davis had his inaugural parade whenever he was elected president of the Confederacy. It's right here at this portico at the Alabama State Capitol, where Governor George Wallace had his inauguration speech and famously declared segregation today segregation tomorrow and segregation forever. And it's also from right here where Martin Luther King Jr. stood out in front of thousands of people standing in opposition to oppression and injustice and violence, and said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So, what started off as an attempt to crush the civil rights movement in Selma, Alabama, really ended up capturing the attention and the outrage of the entire nation, and as a result galvanized Washington to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I love standing in these historic places, and I could probably babble on all day, but I think it would probably be best to just allow the words of Martin Luther King from this very spot to speak for themselves.
I know you're asking today, how long will it take? Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, yes, sir, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed earth will rise again. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. Yes, sir. Because no lie can live forever. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Because you shall reap what you sow. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yes, yes, that scaffold sways the future. Yes. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Yes, how long? Not long. Not long. Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Yes, he's trampling out the village where the grapes of wrath are stored. Yes, sir. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. Yes, his truth is marching on. Yes, sir. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah.